practice scale, we have Evia represented by Leah Alyssa Bayer and Victoria Via, where Victoria is a designer and Leah is the founder and studio director. Leah is also director of the AIA Silicon Valley Board of Directors, an active member of local and national committees. So Evia is going to start us off by responding to the first question, and then all of the firms are going to respond to this first question, and then only certain firms will respond to the following ones. So the first question is, what got your firm started working on equity, diversity, and inclusion initiatives? What were you doing in your workplace and in your projects before the shelter-in-place order in March and the increased awareness brought about by the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement in June?
Thank you, Tasha. And again, I'm Leah from Evia Studio, founder, also your chapter vice president this year, and happy to be on this panel. You know, it's funny being on a Women in Architecture panel talking about this, and what started my firm on equity, diversity and inclusion initiatives, because it truly was the Women in Architecture that spurred that for my firm. Since the inception and founding of my company, which we're young, we're just shy of 3 years old, everything that I built has been driven by my own experiences in architecture, and probably most profoundly by my participation with all of you and your experiences and stories. It's been a really pivotal influence being in the Women in Architecture from the very beginning of my career and hearing all of the issues that we've dealt with. And so from the founding of my company, I wanted to build something that would address those issues with a very different type of business model. For example, we're a virtual practice. That has opened up a lot of opportunities for us. We've got flexible hours since before the shelter-in-place movement. We're an all-women team. And so this was really driven by the Women in Architecture. And actually, a lot of the panelists from this panel, from the very first event that I attended, I think Kate and Pam were speaking at that panel. So it's fun to come full circle. I think, you know, while I started Evia myself, it was really important to me that we were steered by a team. So as a new firm, all of this has really been in development and continues to be developed. So I think I'm going to pass this to Victoria to talk a little bit about what happened last year in conjunction with the development of all of our initiatives in firm culture.
Sure. I'm Victoria Via, again, project manager and designer at Evia Studio based out of Portland, Oregon. So we had our very first Evia company retreat in January, right before shelter in place. And since then, we've been working hard at developing our team's values and commitments. So these concepts were really fresh in my mind when everything happened. But the Black Lives Matter movement made everything feel more important and urgent. I felt really grateful to be able to brainstorm and workshop these together as a group while the rest of the country was also going through these very emotional discussions. And being a very small team, it was also really, it was easy to have these conversations and to have individual voices heard. I guess I'm curious how that's different for a more established firm, a firm with a history of success. So I'd like to pass this question along to Pam and Angshu, as I know ABA has had equity in mind for some time.
Pam, you're muted.
Good afternoon. Again, I'm Pam Anderson Brule, and the one of the principals of Anderson Brule Architects. Our firm was founded almost 36 years ago, and it was founded on principles of diversity and inclusion. And so I feel like we've been at this for a long time. I won't say that the events that took place haven't shocked us and haven't caused us to move in new directions, but we've been on a pathway of diverse hiring. We've been really keeping a careful eye always on pay equity. It is it's something we look at constantly, and anytime a new member is added to our firm, we look at the whole firm, and we look at how that impacts or affects the whole, from a systemically, how are we growing our firm to be supportive of each other in a culture that is really inclusion focused. I always say, and I'll say it again, we always hire the best, and we have about 75% female in our firm, and it has nothing to do with us, seeking only females. It has to do with really involved hiring process and really seeking people that are aligned in their values and their culture to us. So we'll talk a little bit more about what happened since. I think it was the recent events had a profound impact on me personally, on the firm, and really caused us to search broader. So we'll be talking about that. But also, I have to say that I have personally, and the firm has spent a career teaching children about architecture in underserved neighborhoods, teaching design to people that are first-time college entry, high school students that are going into college, and really looking at what we can do as a community to create social justice through our volunteer work as well as our project work. So Angshu, will you take it from there?
Yes. Hi, everybody. My name is Angshu. I'm an associate at ABA. So one of the things I'd like to add to what Pam noted, one of the things we have been practicing as a firm, which is equity focused, is our career path goal setting through what we call the habitat process. So if you imagine the larger firm as an ecosystem, our individual habitats actually provide us with the framework for establishing short-term as well as long-term goals. All employees have access to everyone's habitat, so we can support each other in our growth and also see how we align with the firm's goals and visions. This also ties into our promotions and makes the growth of the individual a transparent and equitable process. This is something I greatly value at ABA. So this is something we have been practicing for a long, long time. So I'd pass the question on to LPA now, Kate and Melody.
Yes, thanks, Angshu. So the LPA origin story of our EDI initiative began at the Women's Leadership Summit in 2019 in Minneapolis. We wrote a grant to LPA for 13 women to go, and they sent 2, and ask big, let other people tell you no. And Melody ended up sending herself, so we met her there. And to say that the experience was anything short of transformative would be underselling it. I think all 3 of us who were there had a complete worldview shift about what other firms are doing in this space, not just around gender equity, but around all types of equity. And so there was a champagne happy hour at the end where the 3 of us got back together after our week going to different conferences, and we're just like, plans exploded. And so we came back and pitched an EDI initiative to our CEO, Wendy Rogers. And then we pitched it again to Wendy and some male allies, I think both of whom were on the call actually. And then she allowed us to form a task force. And this was individuals from all 6 of our offices and as diverse in terms of age, race, gender, other that we could come up with, discipline as well, because we're a multidisciplinary firm. We had 2 meetings. One was to share our personal stories with each other and really get to know each other. So it felt like a safe space for us to kind of embark on this kind of work together. And then we had homework to come up with what our dream top 5 initiatives for the firm to tackle would be. And our next meeting was to vote, kind of coalesce everyone's ideas and vote on what the 5 that we would recommend to the LPA firm leadership would be. So we submitted our recommendations, and then COVID hit, right, Melody? I mean, it was right then. It was like the next couple
Pretty
weeks.
much. Yeah, it was like right after.
And so things went a little quiet. And so I would say that when, in the wake of the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and the widespread civil unrest that summer, it was like a rocket ship went off for us. Like we had all these recommendations kind of locked and loaded in the bag. And it was like, we're doing this next week. So we were glad that we had kind of had that background work prepped since the fall before so that we could hit the ground running. So we had an event launch and explained the initiative to the whole firm on a webinar just like this, and recruited people. We got about 20% of the firm responded that they wanted to be part of this group. So now we're on a cadence of quarterly meetings where we meet together as an entire firm, and then we break out into smaller studio groups. There's 4 for Irvine because there's such a big office, but the rest of us just have 1. So we meet for 15 minutes together and then 45 minutes apart. And the purpose of those groups is really just to crowdsource and gather everyone's input on whatever initiatives on the floor that day. So our first one was on equitable recruitment and our pipeline, and that directly led into our LPA diversity and inclusiveness scholarship, interdisciplinary scholarship, and which has launched. And our second meeting was about equitable advancement within the firm, and that led to the creation of a project leadership academy where project leaders or pending project leaders will be trained equitably across the firm to kind of take that next step into project leadership and project management. So I don't know, Melody, do you have anything to add? That's where we are now. We're planning our third one.
That was like an amazing summary of all that, because there has been a lot that has happened in the last year. Maybe the only thing I would add to that is because our firm is so large, you know, we have 400 people across 6 offices. It is obviously a huge undertaking to try and organize an effort like this. So the way that we've approached it is of course, we want broad-based involvement, support, and input. So the studio group meetings are open to everyone, anyone who's interested, really, regardless. We have to keep reminding people, regardless of whether, you know, you're male or female or a minority or not a minority, everyone is welcome. We want to hear everyone's voices. That's the whole point of this inclusiveness dialogue. So we have those studio meetings that are open to everyone, but there's also a more focused group that we initially called our core group. I think we might be potentially changing the nomenclature of it, but in any case, the concept of it is it's a smaller group of people that are helping to lead these studio group meetings, and they can be more active in directing the action items that come out of those meetings. And they're sort of our voice that feeds into a higher level leadership conversation so that the firm leaders can stay engaged, but not have to talk to 400 people at once, right? So it just brings a little bit more structure to the process. So I think that's pretty much a summary of where LPA is at, and I'd like to pass it along to Katya and Jackie from Steinberg Hart to tell us what's going on at their firm.
Here, Melody and Kate. And back in 2018, we recognized the JEDI agenda was important, and we established a culture staff development committee. But so those efforts continue, and before March, we knew that 2020 was going to continue being a year of growth and positive change. We were already planning on submitting our documentation to become a just organization, and we were committed more than ever to promote our diversity and enhance our employee wellness. We had already set up some money on the budget in order to give certain allowances. We have had a long history in the Bay Area of participating in mentorship programs, sponsorships, and we had already established some structured collaborations with Black-owned businesses. Our projects, we do a lot of work with civic clients and higher ed clients. So the projects were already set up with standards for inclusive stakeholder meetings and diverse teams. And then after the shelter-in-place order and the Black Lives Matter movement, what it created was an additional need for transparency and accountability and intentionality to listen to those BIPOC voices, not just externally, but also internally. Jackie, do you want to add?
Yeah, thank you, Katya. So Katya mentioned, that there was this sort of need to look internally as well to our BIPOC staff. And, I, as a junior designer, I was aware that we were pursuing the JUST label. I was aware that there was like a cultural and staff development group, but it was kind of all more like higher administration or leadership. And it wasn't really until our CEO kind of sent out this letter after, the resurgence of Black Lives Matter that I felt called to really stand up and take more responsibility within the firm and outside within the community, just because there was this huge like cultural shift for action and taking initiatives. And I think just realizing how careful that message was from the CEO, you know, there wasn't a rush to get a response out. I felt like there was a sense of trust within the firm for them to consider my thoughts as a BIPOC, you know, young designer, and my other coworkers as well. This is just kind of how our groups started forming. So from that, we formed 2 committees, one that's focused on community efforts and rolling out initiatives for that, and then another one that's more looking at our practice and internal work. And so we're meeting about, before the holidays anyways, we were meeting about bi-weekly, and you know, we started rolling out initiatives. It was a lot easier, I will say, for our community group to start rolling out initiatives, just because it's easier to kind of reflect on like what you want to see within your community and what are the needs of others that our practice, our industry can really assist with and help out with. But we definitely recognize that internally within our own practice, there's definitely a lot of growth and self-editing that we've all been taken, even as like non-leadership, leadership across the board. There's definitely this understanding that this is a movement that we're all continuously learning about, and we're all constantly, you know, checking ourselves. And again, just like having that reassurance and that sort of trust within each other that we can, you know, call each other out whether or not we are leadership or not. So that was kind of the case for us at Steinberg Hart.
Thank you, Jackie. And I'll continue to the next question. And that question is for Pam and Leah. As leaders, do you consider what questions and which conversations are appropriate for your firms to tackle? What do you think it's our responsibility as a firm to discuss, you know, and as a team? And how do you think that is important, you know, for those perspectives to be developed as a company? Pam, Leah, do you want to start?
Sure, I can jump in and start. You know, as I mentioned earlier, navigating firm culture as a team has sort of been important to me from the start. And so while I created the company with certain strong feelings about particular issues and made some executive decisions about those things, such as pay transparency, I'd say some things that are controversial to other firms. As a leader, there were a lot of other issues that I, as a new firm owner, had no idea whether or not I should take a stance on as a company. And so we decided to turn it over to the team and discuss these issues as a group. So during that retreat, we looked at a whole slew of different issues, values, difficulties with identities, and had some pretty deep discussions on the implications of taking a strong stance with regard to those. And interestingly, as a team, we decided that we wanted to take bolder stances and stand up for a lot of these issues. More so than not, I think there were none of these issues that we weren't comfortable with tackling as a company. And I recognize that there is probably some legal risk there that as a small young firm, we are not paying close attention to just yet, that we'll need to as we grow. But it was really great that through this sort of democratic process, we were able to decide as a group to take a stand, as opposed to putting it on my shoulders and having to say yes or no, this is what we're going to stand for. I will say, though, that even though we agreed to take a stand on a lot of these things, and all of us were very well aligned with our values, the events that occurred in 2020 complicated that a bit. I think we were all sort of rosy and peachy about what we stood for during that retreat, and then things have changed. And our team is pretty diverse, and we have some politically diverse team members. And in a small group that talks about everything, that can be very challenging. And last year and still this year has been very emotional. So we've been navigating taking those stances still while being respectful of our past and differences. One of the conversations that came up while we were talking about values and commitments, for example, which is non-political, is that we were determining if there are certain types of work that we wanted to decide not to do. and decided as a group that we didn't want to get involved in law enforcement or prisons or anything like that. And one of our team members has a strong portfolio in prison design work and is really proud of that, and felt like that was a commentary on them as an architect and that they had done something wrong in the past. So it was really about recognizing and supporting where all of us have come from, and just paying attention to the future and where we're headed now, and not judge people for what they've done in the past. So my goal has been to keep us focused on values, that there's not one side versus another side. There's no me versus you mentality as it relates to these issues. We have common goals and just different perspectives on where we've been and how we might get there. But we all want the same thing in the end. So as a small team, we were able to do this together with a little less risk, but I know that there are probably a lot of other things that we should have considered. So knowing that you are similarly bold and strong with regard to JEDI initiatives and perspectives, Pam, I'd love to hear how you've made those decisions as a strong leader for your firm, where there's a lot more complexity, I think, involved in what you do as a group.
Yeah, I'm a risk taker, so I don't know. I didn't think about that at all either. So I think for us, a couple things stood out is that, we have been very careful as a firm to be apolitical. I will say in the past, in other words, it's not something we talk about around the cafe, who'd you vote for? What are you doing? And there's a very different level of opinion across the spectrum of people of what is political or not political, what is okay to talk about, what is not okay to talk about. So as with all things ABA, we were very collaborative, but we decided that, and I would say that Erica and other voices within our firm, young voices, really, this discussion is called a call to action, right? And so as much as our firm has always stood for these things, there was this very distinctive moment and very distinctive, I'll call it a soul-searching challenge that took over my life for a little while. And I was reaching out, I'm big on benchmarking, so I was reaching out to lots of different people, having lots of different conversations, but it really mattered to me how we decided to talk about it. And I think one of the big takeaways for us is that the principals realized that we couldn't possibly represent everybody, that there was a big enough spectrum within our firm and all good people and all shared values that we decided to represent ourselves. So we, the three principals, created our statement that we made very public, and we put it out for the firm, we put it out for the world, and it's where we as principals stand. The next thing we did is that we then set up a funding that was actually principal created, so it comes from us personally, that anyone in the firm can donate their personal funds to what they as an individual believe in, and we'll match those funds. So it was an interesting mix of listening to everyone, having this dialogue happen and really affect us, not shy away. We had a lot of one-on-one conversations, for instance, with people, lots of different sort of demands of us, of how to represent ourselves. And that's how we found that we could represent what we believed in as principals. And then we could support the individual thinking through this matching of funds. And so, that's just a small window into how we think and what we did, but it was one that was really complex and just was really engaged in a ton of conversation for that one, sort of for that one big statement out in the world. So I'll leave it at that. I know time is ticking, but I think I'm going to lead us to our next question. And that question is, have you experienced pushback or resistance when advocating for JEDI initiatives to be put on the agenda or advance your firm? If so, have you been able to find allies in the firm, leadership, or discover other strategies to keep the ball moving forward? And I'm going to ask that question right now of Jackie from Steinberg Hart. And then later, Melody and Kate will follow up from LPA.
Thank you, Pam. As you mentioned earlier, like across the board, everyone's views politically or non-politically are going to vary and be different. So I think getting like 100% buy-in from leadership or from the firm as a whole is just kind of like a difficult ask. I think for us, we're kind of fortunate that our figurehead was just so gung-ho about our groups, leading and advocating for our initiatives. And, we were able to garner lots of support within the different various pockets of our firm, both leadership and non-leadership. For us, or at least for me, I really noticed like a shift in, gaining support when we worked with Designing in Color. And if you guys are all not familiar with this group, I definitely suggest looking them up. But we did 2 workshops with Designing in Color, and after our first workshop, I felt like there are a lot of people, who maybe were not so vocal about what our groups were doing, or they weren't really too sure. I felt like after that first workshop, we gained so much support. There was definitely like an increase in interest to join the groups, an increase in support in offering suggestions. And I think after that first initial workshop, that's when we really started rolling our initiatives. We really gained so much traction. So I think in an ideal world, it would be nice to get that 100%, support from leadership or from everyone. But I think, our agenda has always just been true into, what our guiding principles were and what were those first initiatives and things we wanted to start rolling out. And having the key support definitely helped, but at the end of the day, our coworkers, leadership and non-leadership, we were very supportive of each other, and we really wanted to make sure that whatever the alignment of the firm was true to our intentions, and whether or not we had that support or not, I think we were going to continue forward. But definitely that workshop definitely helped, clear up some of that confusion or the questions that we had within the firm. I would like to ask a little bit of the insight from Melody and Kate on, I guess, the agenda at LPA and how you guys started getting that, ball moving forward.
I've committed the sin of 2020 of being on mute. So thank you so much, Jackie. So for LPA, I think we touched on a little bit earlier about how the nice thing was that we had already kind of gotten this movement started from Kate and me attending this conference in September of the previous year. So it wasn't so much that there was active pushback as there wasn't real we didn't feel that there was this huge groundswell of just interest and support as much until the event started unfolding, with the pandemic and then the racial unrest. There was just so much more going on that created this atmosphere of more people being interested in the change. And I think there's a sense of probably that acknowledging that there's an issue to be addressed is, I guess, the first step, right? And I think that maybe is the story of what happened at LPA, is that as these issues started coming to the forefront in the national discussion, it also started happening more on a firm-wide level among all levels. And so that became an impetus for those in leadership to recognize that, hey, there's actually, a lot of good discussions happening here, and those outside of the current leadership structure can bring their concerns and the issues that they find important to the table, and be that squeaky wheel of, this is what we think needs to happen. So we had some really great early successes, as Kate explained earlier, with our first step with the project, the pipeline kind of discussion of how we're going to help bring a more diverse group of people into the architecture and design fields. Coming out with that LPA Interdisciplinary Diversity Scholarship was a great win for us. And it was pretty easy to get going, really, because LPA has a history of being very supportive of community engagement and just charitable projects. So that one was easy to get out and get people excited about. I think the things that'll be a little bit more challenging as we move forward as our second stage involves more inward looking efforts as far as how do we create more equitable opportunities for advancement across the firm, and make sure that we're identifying talent even in places that maybe you wouldn't normally think to look, right? Maybe the stereotypical view of what a leader looks like. And so we're hoping that we're going to be able to help that happen with the Project Leader Academy and give people the tools that they need, both the hard skills like technical skills and soft skills that you need to succeed as a leader. And I think that's just something that I'm really excited about personally. And I think that, just to wrap it all up, the allies that we've gotten in firm leadership have meant a lot to us. I know that personally for me, I had some of these discussions starting really early on, and I wasn't sure that it was, how I was going to be able to bring these topics to the whole firm. But I had a couple of allies, male allies in leadership, who really encouraged me to speak up and to that my voice was important, and that my experience as a woman and as a minority is something that is a unique voice that isn't always represented. And so I just really found that really heartening, and think that that's certainly a positive view of what we're doing at LPA.
Yeah, I wouldn't add a thing, Melody.
Yeah.
So I think we'll just roll on to the next question. So our question for Angshu and Victoria is, besides gender and racial diversity, there are other types. Are there other types of diversity that your firm is taking into consideration in these conversations?
Yes, absolutely. I think I'd like to add to what Pam said about, the diversity that we consider in our hiring process. But as, architects and strategic planners and interior designers, I wanted to add that, ABA has created a niche in serving the very unique needs of very unique populations. For the last 3 years, we have been focused on researching the needs for the special needs population, in specific, the neurodiverse population. And last year, we hosted think tanks focused on the IDD, housing needs. IDD, I will expand that. It's the intellectually and developmentally disabled population. And that think tank actually included attendees and users who are on the autism spectrum, and also differently abled users. So as a firm, we are focused on initiatives revolving around inclusivity and in the practice of design as well. So, and then I will pass on the question to Victoria.
Sure, thanks, Anshu. So yes, EVIA, we are taking into consideration other types of diversity. I have a lot of things to say on this, so I'll try to keep it short. Internally, there are a few different types. One is age, and this happens naturally at most offices where you have a distinct hierarchy of seniority. But EVIA is a new firm, so it was really important to us at the start to have an age diverse group. And we've found that there's been so much payoff in understanding the different strengths and perspectives of both our younger and older team members. Leah touched on this, but we're a very diverse team, and we feel differently about a lot of things. So we've had disagreements on how to do things, and that's actually really helped us grow a lot. Mutual mentorship is really important to our team. There's a real beauty in age diversity and so much cross-pollination that comes with different experiences. Another type of diversity is location. As a fully virtual firm, we can hire from anywhere in the world, and we have interviewed people halfway across the world. We want to be sure to give people opportunities that they don't readily have in their area. And what comes along with this is so many other types of diversity: socioeconomic, cultural, political diversity. And it would be much more difficult to get these types of diversity if our applicant pool is only in the Bay Area. So diversity is such a complex topic, and we're continually trying to understand the different facets of this. A small tidbit: our team has a fun exercise challenge that we do to help motivate each other to move and stay active. And we've only recently modified this challenge to take into account that different people have different abilities. We can't just award points to the one person that can run marathons. So it's been a really good reminder that there are always ways to layer in considerations for people of different abilities. We started this focus on diversity internally, but at our company retreat, we also started thinking about the types of projects that we want to take on. We had been doing only single family residential, but also wanted to provide architectural services to a more diverse community. This past year has really amplified the importance of that. We've been really fortunate to partner with great local firms on community-focused housing, including senior housing, women's shelters, affordable housing. And yeah, I'm proud that EVIA has committed to diversity initiatives, and I think that having a diverse team will help widen our perspectives and help us all become more understanding and accepting. So being younger and in a more junior position at EVIA, I really appreciate having my voice heard, and we've sort of made all of these decisions together as a small team. But on that note, I have a question that I'll first direct to Julie from LPA. How is this moment experienced differently for people in more senior roles versus those in more junior roles?
Thanks, Victoria. So first, I want to say my skin is not naturally this blue. I'm having trouble finding the right light today, so just forgive that. So to answer that from a more junior role perspective, I think in more junior roles, we often think that we can't make change. We often are the ones that want change but don't know how to achieve it. And I think a lot of this comes down to finding the right ways to go about it. And I had the opportunity of watching this EDI initiative come together since I'm close to Kate and now Melody. And this gave me a really great opportunity and was really inspiring because I was able to see how, regardless of our role, we can make proposals and have carefully thought out goals and eventually make them happen. And I've seen that the more kind of thoughtful we are and clear about our goal and kind of have a clear purpose behind it, the more likely that that's to be considered by leadership or whoever is making the calls at your firm. And I think sometimes we put this idea across and then we expect everyone else to run with it and take care of it for us, and that doesn't really work. If we're the ones that want to make something change, we're usually the ones that are kind of the most passionate about it. So it's important that if you want to see something through, you have to prepare to do a lot of the legwork for it. Otherwise, we're kind of just complaining and hoping someone else cares about it more and takes care of it. So I think, one, knowing that you have the opportunity to make change yourself and seeing that there is now kind of a clear way to go about it. Now that we have the EDI group formed, it's become a really great chance for us to come together and talk about ideas and notice that other people have the same thoughts. And now that you have multiple people coming together, there's a lot more strength and kind of power behind those thoughts and ability to make them happen. And through this group, we've been able to create scholarships. Melody and Kate mentioned this new kind of leadership forum kind of for teaching us skills to grow in our roles. And I'm excited to see what else we come up with each of our meetings to make LPA an even better firm. So lastly, we have Erica. I'd like to hear your thoughts as well.
I will try my best to be brief. I know that the clock is ticking, as we mentioned earlier. I think Pam touched briefly on how leadership and more senior roles we're feeling at ABA, this responsibility to both represent the firm as a whole with taking into account all of the complexities of different opinions and levels of experience and things of that nature. And for the younger generation in the firm, it felt as though it was this first opportunity to really make a necessary change or open up the conversation that had previously been in academia. I think that the education around architecture is shifting and still has a long way to go, but the conversations around combating racial and social inequities in our field, as well as the structures of the society in which we are operating, had previously, for me, been interpersonal and in academia. And this felt like the necessary time to push our leadership and our firm as a whole to continue the conversation and think about what we could do in our design work as well as our firm culture. And I think that I will now pass it to Katya for our closing thoughts on this question.
Thank you, Erica. The events last week were definitely an indication of the polarization of US politics. However, I think Americans, hold fewer extreme views that people may realize. However, Victoria did talk about the polarization that is driven by age. And typically, younger people are more liberal and they drift steadily to the right and becoming more conservative as they get closer to retirement age. There have been studies about this, and there's a little bit of controversy behind that. But that's typically the trend, and I'm generalizing a little bit. At Steinberg Hart, probably for the past 4 or 5 years, we've actually changed and evolved, and the leadership team is now a pretty young leadership team. However, we still have some partners that are about to retire. That's my dog. They're about to retire, but they also saw the civil rights movements of the 50s and 60s. And it was actually quite interesting to hear from them. And they were almost telling us, yes, go ahead and do all this, but they were stepping back. And they were just listening and seeing us pushing and moving the ball forward, while they kind of felt that they had seen it before. So they were not as enthusiastic as the younger staff. And that created a lot of conversations, amongst ourselves. But our junior staff is the more diverse in the entire history of the company. And it was definitely a polarity and I wouldn't say a division, but definitely a different approach, to what we were doing. However, very similar to what EVA is doing, we are striving to treat all the employees as individuals and not as members of certain generations, and respecting their opinions, and continue to be reminded that we all can learn from our differences. So with that, I would like to open it to Q&A. Dasha actually posted, if you want to unmute yourself and turn on your camera and or post some questions in the chat, we'll be happy to have a conversation.
Yeah, thank you all so much. Those were great responses and a great conversation. I feel like everyone must be stunned because I'm not seeing further questions in the chat, but everybody, we'd like to see your faces, and so please go ahead and unhide yourselves so that we can see who you are. And if you'd like to raise your hand, we can also moderate the Q&A through that.
I stole a bunch of ideas, so.
Is there anyone who, I'm not seeing any raised hands yet.
We can be done. Time for cocktails.
There's so much more to unpack, though. I thought that last comment about the kind of generations who have come before, who also led civil rights movements, was so fascinating. That on the one hand, there's the respect that's due to people coming from complex and different backgrounds that Leah insisted on and noted, and on the other hand, there's people who are ready to step aside to let the next generation lead the way, which I also thought was really fascinating.
Yeah, I stole the idea from Steinberg Hart of having kind of an internally facing group and an externally facing group, kind of similar to the challenge that Melody mentioned that we face. It's always so much easier as a person and as a firm to focus on those outward facing initiatives, and it's tougher to do that internal work. So to have a group dedicated to each, I thought was extremely smart, and we might be stealing that one.
And Kate, that was the intention of this presentation. You guys are collective call to action. So this is not just for us to keep, oh, this is what we're doing and we will not share. Please reach out to either one of us if you have any ideas or have done anything differently, because what we need is a change, and we are more powerful if we do this all together.
So we have a couple of questions coming in. We have one from Melinda. Melinda, you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask the question yourself.
Hey folks, I'm so excited to hear from all of you, see some friendly, familiar faces too. So I'm just wondering, as a small firm, what are some basic ways that I can be thinking of making my hiring pipeline more diverse? I'm ready to hire again. Instead of just splattering a job posting everywhere, how can I be thinking differently about this?
One idea that we've been looking into, a couple is one is to start creating a relationship between you and the college or university that you might be interested in hiring from. And then if you let them know you're interested in a very diverse and equitable kind of bandwidth, that to stretch outside of themselves to think through that. There are a lot of university organizations that represent different groups, different coalitions, not only university, but actually in the public as well. So if you begin to understand that these special organizations exist that people belong to, you can start linking into those organizations and advertising for work based on that. I think it's really helpful to have kind of your statement written and the value statement and what you're trying to do before you start those communications, but I think that really helps.
There are also a lot of Instagram accounts that are specifically dedicated to certain groups in architecture. There's Latinx in architecture. Architecture is poly. America's Hidden Gems. There's a zillion others. Black at AIA. And I'm wondering if that might not be also, I haven't seen them do job postings, but I'm wondering if that might be an emerging place to do so.
I will also add that NOMUS is a great resource. I was a NOMUS member, so if you guys aren't familiar with NOMA, it's the National Organization of Minority Architecture, and then the S at the end is just for students, so it's the student chapter, and a lot of firms will align with NOMUS, so it's creating that relationship. So if, Melinda, if you and your firm can kind of align with NOMUS groups within your area, I think that'd be a great resource to kind of start linking that relationship together.
I want to piggyback on what Pam said about the statement. I think part of what I've struggled with is not seeing as diverse of an applicant pool and recognizing that might be because we don't have visual representation of a very like culturally or ethnically diverse team that's visible just from our faces or our names in the firm. And how do we get across that? And I think just having the statement that you're committed to a very diverse team, that sort of opens the door and says like we're welcoming of everyone of all types. And I think just crafting your posting with the right language and inclusive language is just as important as where you're posting. I think the two go hand in hand.
Thank you. There's another question from Sherry. Sherry, would you like to unmute and go ahead and ask that?
Well, if not, Jackie, do you want to talk about, well, I'll give a brief on Designing in Color. Designing in Color is a group that had done a lot of workshops before the shelter in place in Southern California. And they were already in those conversations about Black communities and how to be more inclusive in any approach of design. When the Black Lives Matter movement started, they continue those efforts, and now they are engaging with firms to help them go through separate workshops in order to educate, but also open the conversation and have those workshops with different type of architectural firms and different type of governments. So Jackie, I don't know if you want to add anything. I'll post the link again. Hopefully this time it works.
I think kind of similar to Katya, what you were saying earlier with like the generational differences. I think designing in color did kind of, because of the different school of thoughts from the age differences, like myself and some of my coworkers within the same sort of like age group, this was all sort of like rhetoric that was already starting to get taught within our schools. And hearing, some of the seniors saying, oh, I never thought about these types of, design strategies that maybe we once thought were like for security actually might have some negative implications towards, different BIPOC groups and be seen in a negative way. So I think, having that perspective and really being open-minded towards, designing colors workshop and thinking about, what you learned in school and thinking about how that may affect, different BIPOC communities. I think that's very interesting. So having an open mind for that, it's good.
Thank you. Another question, and I think this is going to have to be our last one. This is an exciting conversation and lots of questions, and we'll register these to address them somehow through future programming. What are some strategies that individuals can use to convince firm leadership to move EDI forward from reactionary to visionary, which Heather Chacon has posted this. And Heather, if you want to elaborate a little bit about reactionary versus visionary, that would be great.
Yeah, thanks. I'm excited to hear other people's thoughts on this. Just in general, if there's sort of maybe a vocal group of people who want to see some progress, I think especially in larger institutions, it can be harder to get people on board and not just sort of do the bare minimum of, oh, well, a client's asking for this, but actually put a lot of thought and effort into like what sort of changes should we actually make, and having some of those internal conversations, and what are things that are actually motivating for leadership to look at things from that perspective, as opposed to just kind of reacting to what people are asking from us.
Yeah, one thing that our kind of Melodies and my co-leader of our group, Brian Graham, and I always talk about is building an unignorable coalition. So start with your peers and start with your teammates and build up a group big enough that it, our group, we have access to 20% of the firm at any given time. We send one email and there's a bunch of people ready to give their opinion and ready to, so I think having a large enough portion of the firm that communicates that they care about it has gone a long way for us to ease that kind of trepidation, legitimate trepidation on the part of firm leadership to know whether or not they're overstepping. We're telling them, no, you're not overstepping. This is what we want from you, and giving them the permission to then kind of act on that and know that they'll have their firm behind them.
One example for us is that we do design labs, and one of our design labs was focused on critical race theory. And Dasha, I believe you were one of the people to bring that to us, but that conversation grew roots between generations of people. Then one of our principals went to a critical race theory conference. Then the conversation grew a little bit more. And so I think, going from to how to make it comfortable, it shouldn't be too comfortable. Erica was good at making sure it was never too comfortable. But I would say if you're trying to start a conversation, Kate and I think Melody talked about find your allies too. So start with allies, start with Leah talked about a collective message that you're trying to bring forward so you can be clear, and then start infecting the minds of your elders, your leadership group, getting them to think about things that you might have been educated in university, but it is mind blowing if you're a lot older and you weren't educated that way. You believe in it. So I would just say, a lot of what was said today is, start small, get organized, find your allies, and then move that forward. That's a call to action from all of us.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. That's such a great note to end this on. Allies are critical, and hearing each other is critical. And I think everyone has done such a great job listening and sharing today. Thank you to all the speakers for engaging with this process and this format, and giving one another the space to share and ask questions of each other. So we're going to keep talking about these questions through the WIA and through the AIA. And if you're interested, please reach out to us. We'd love to hear more voices and incorporate more voices. So please get in touch and stay in touch, and have a great rest of your day and week. Thank you all very much.